Welcome to the InnoGuide Podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. In this episode, number 34, we'll be sharing Storyworthy, Part 1 by Matthew Dix. Preface: A Coward Tells a Story. Let me take you back to July 12th, 2011. I'm sitting in the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in downtown Manhattan. It's a Monday night, but the energy in the room feels like a Saturday. This place is packed. Hipsters crammed into the metal folding chairs, standing at the back and huddled around wobbly tables. The air is thick with the smell of stale beer, and the spotlight is trained on a small stage cluttered with audio equipment and a single microphone. This is my first time at a Moth Story Slam, and I'm here to do something I've been dreading for months: tell a story. Now let me be clear, I didn't want to be there. Sure, I'd promised my friends I'd tell a story at the Moth someday, but as I sat there, I was praying my name wouldn't be called. I dropped my name into the canvas tote bag, which the host Dan Kennedy kept calling a hat, but I was secretly hoping it would stay buried at the bottom. I was terrified. The idea of standing on that stage, bearing my soul to a room full of strangers, made me want to bolt for the door. 2 years earlier, my friend Kim had introduced me to the Moth Podcast. The Moth is an organization where people tell true stories live on stage without notes. I was instantly hooked. The vulnerability, humor, and raw honesty of these storytellers captivated me. Listening to those stories, I felt an immediate connection to people I'd never met. It was like peeking into someone's soul. But I didn't think of myself as a storyteller. I was a novelist. I made up characters and plots in the quiet of my writing room. Telling true stories? That was a whole different beast. And performing them in front of an audience? Forget it. I was a wedding DJ. Sure, but nobody expected me to be funny or vulnerable while introducing the bride and groom. Storytelling felt like a high-stakes game I was not ready to play. My friends, however, thought differently. They kept telling me I'd be great at storytelling because of my horrible life. They weren't wrong. My life has been colorful, to say the least. I've been brought back to life by paramedics twice, arrested for a crime I didn't commit, robbed at gunpoint, and even lived with a family of Jehovah's Witnesses who had a pet goat. My friends were convinced these experiences would make for great stories. They'd say things like, "Tell the one about the time you went through the windshield," or "What about the time you were hired as a stripper at McDonald's?" I promised them I'd go to New York and tell a story. I even got excited about it, but then I didn't go. I made excuses. I told myself I wasn't ready. I was scared. Eventually, the guilt of not following through became unbearable. I told my wife, Alicia, that I had to do it. One and done, I said. I'll tell one story and never look back. Alicia, ever confident in my abilities, bought the tickets. And that's how I found myself sitting in the cafe, praying my name wouldn't be called. But of course, it was. "Matthew Dix," Dan Kennedy announced. I froze. For a moment, I considered staying silent, pretending I wasn't there, but then Alicia kicked me under the table and said, "That's your name. Move it." I walked to the stage, terrified. But as soon as I started speaking, something incredible happened. I fell in love. I told a story about learning to pole vault in high school and my secret desire for my teammate to fail so I could look better. I shared the ugly truth, and the audience laughed and cheered. When I finished, I returned to my seat, exhilarated. A woman leaned over and said, "You won." I couldn't believe it. I'd won my first Moth Story Slam. That night changed my life. Since then, I've told hundreds of stories, won dozens of Story Slams, and even become a 5-time Grand Slam champion. But I didn't start out as a storyteller. I wasn't born with some special gift. I was just a guy with a lot of stories and a willingness to share them. My friends were wrong about one thing, though. They thought my unusual life experiences were what made me a good storyteller. But the truth is, you don't have to have lived a crazy life to tell stories. The best stories often come from the smallest, most ordinary moments. We all have stories worth telling. You just need to know how to find them. And that's what this book is about. I'm going to show you how to find your stories, craft them, and share them in a way that connects with others. If I can do it, so can you. Let's get started. Gotta say, this book has changed the way I look at things that I read on the internet. Storytelling is definitely a craft, and we're going to learn a lot together in this book. Chapter 1, My Promise to You. In Chapter 1, Matthew Dix sets the stage for why storytelling matters and how it can transform lives, even for those who don't aspire to stand on a stage. He begins with a relatable anecdote about a man in one of his workshops who questioned why he was there, as he had no interest in public storytelling. This question becomes the foundation for the chapter, as Dix explains that storytelling is not just for performers, but for anyone who wants to connect, persuade, or simply be understood. Dix shares his own journey into storytelling, which began reluctantly. He recounts how his wife, Alicia, encouraged him to start a storytelling organization called Speak Up, which eventually led him to teaching storytelling workshops. Initially resistant, he discovers a passion for helping others craft and share their stories. His students ranged from performers to professionals like lawyers, teachers, and even couples looking to strengthen their relationships. Through these workshops, Dix realized that storytelling is a universal skill that can enhance every aspect of life, from career success to personal connections. This chapter is filled with examples of how storytelling has impacted people in unexpected ways. Dix describes how storytelling helped a grandfather connect with his grandchildren, improved a teacher's classroom engagement, and even saved marriages. He emphasizes that storytelling is not about having extraordinary experiences, but about finding meaning in everyday moments. He promises readers that by following his methods, they too can become compelling storytellers. Dix also introduces the idea that storytelling is an art without rigid rules. While there are no universal laws, he assures readers that his strategies are effective and have been proven to work for countless students. He concludes the chapter with a heartfelt promise: if you commit to learning and practicing the craft, you will not only become better storytellers, but also discover a deeper understanding of yourselves and your lives. This chapter sets a warm, encouraging tone, inviting readers to embark on a journey of self-discovery through storytelling. It's not just about learning a skill, it's about transforming how you see and share your life. Chapter 2, What is a Story and What is the Dinner Test? Let's talk about stories, not the kind you read in books or watch in movies, but the kind you live every day. You might not realize it yet, but your life is brimming with stories, real, personal, and powerful. In this chapter, I want to help you understand what a story truly is and how to recognize it in your own life. And yes, I'll even give you a little test to make sure your stories are ready for prime time. A story isn't just a series of events. It's not a list of things that happened to you on vacation or a funny thing your friend said. A real story has a few key ingredients. 1. Change over time. A story is about transformation. You start as one version of yourself and end as another. Maybe you learn something, lose something, or gain a new perspective. Without change, it's just an anecdote, a fun romp, but not a story. Number 2, it's your story only. The best stories are personal. They are about you. Sure, you can include other people, but you need to be the protagonist. For example, I once told a story about my friend Benji, who went for a run in the rain and came back a changed man. But the story wasn't about him. It was about how his transformation affected me and our friendship. And 3, the dinner test. Here's the big one. Imagine you're at dinner with friends. Would you tell your story the same way? If your story is full of theatrical gestures, overly poetic language, or starts with a random dialogue like, "Mom, I told you not to look under my bed," it's not passing the test. A good story should feel natural, like something you'd share over a meal. Power of personal stories. Let me tell you a little secret. Personal stories are magic. They connect us in ways that folk tales or fables never can. When I tell a story about my life, warts and all, you see me, you understand me, and maybe, just maybe, you see a little bit of yourself in my story too. Take the time I went to Chili's with Alicia, my now wife. It wasn't a date, but it was the first time we had dinner alone. She asked me a few questions about myself, and I told her stories, real, honest, and a little self-deprecating. That night, she started falling for me, not because I was particularly charming or good-looking, her words, not mine, but because my stories showed her who I was. Examples of what not to do. Let's get one thing straight. Not every story is a story. Drinking stories, vacation stories, they're usually just anecdotes. Fun, sure, but not transformative. Here are some quick rules. Drinking stories. No one cares as much as you do. If you're over 40, they're often just sad. Vacation stories. Unless something truly remarkable happened, keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to hear about the local cuisine or how beautiful the beach was. The dinner test in action. Imagine this. You're at dinner and your friend Tom starts telling a story. He says, "Liz, I'm taking the dog for a walk around the lake," and then mimics slamming a screen door. You'd probably think, "Check, please." That's not how people talk at dinner, and it's not how you should tell a story on stage either. Aim for authenticity. Your story should feel like a conversation, not a performance. When I tell stories on stage, I want the audience to feel like we're sitting at a table together just talking. That's the magic of storytelling. It's intimate, personal, and real. Why do stories matter? They're not just for entertainment. They're how we connect, teach, and inspire. They're how we make sense of the world and our place in it. And the best part, you don't need to have lived an extraordinary life to tell extraordinary stories. The smallest moments, like a dinner at Chili's, can be the most powerful. So what's your story? Chapter 3, Homework for Life. I love this chapter. Let me tell you about a moment that changed my life forever. I was sitting at the dinner table with my family, my wife Alicia, my 5-year-old daughter Clara, and my almost 3-year-old son Charlie. It was one of those chaotic family dinners where Charlie, as usual, was refusing to eat. That night it was chicken nuggets, and every single one I handed him ended up on the floor. Our dog, the only dog in the world who doesn't eat table scraps, just stared at the mess blankly. I was losing my mind. I turned to Alicia and said, "What are we going to do about Charlie and the food?" She calmly replied that she'd asked the pediatrician during his checkup the next day. Great, let the expert solve this. The next evening, we're back at the table, this time with peas. Charlie, the ever-Olympic pea-throwing champion, was rolling them across the floor like they were tiny bowling balls. Frustrated, I asked Alicia, "What did the doctor say about Charlie and the food?" She put her fork down, took a deep breath, and said, "The doctor said when Charlie throws food, we have to take all the food away from him, and I know that's going to be hard for you." I was confused. Why would that be hard for me? I've always been able to discipline my kids when needed. Then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "I know that when you were a little boy, you didn't always have enough food to eat, so taking food away from Charlie is going to be hard for you." She was right. I had never told her about my childhood hunger. It was a secret I had kept for decades, buried deep because of the shame and embarrassment that comes with being a hungry child. But Alicia, after years of listening to my stories, had pieced it together. She knew my secret. She went on to tell me that every morning when I packed Clara's lunch for school, I always packed far more food than she could ever eat. After I left for work, Alicia would quietly unpack the lunchbox and remove the excess food. She had never told me this before because she knew how important it was to make sure my kids never went hungry. In that moment, I realized something profound. Alicia knew me better than anyone else in the world. She knew my heart better than I did. It was a moment of connection and understanding I'll never forget. This moment at the dinner table was one of many small, seemingly insignificant moments that I've learned to recognize as storyworthy. Years ago, I realized if I wanted to continue telling stories on stage, I needed to find more stories. But not just the big dramatic ones, like the time I died in the side of the road or was arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I needed the small, everyday moments that resonate with people on a deeper level. So I assigned myself a task, homework for life. Every day, I would reflect on my day and ask one simple question. If I had to tell a story about something that happened today, what would it be? Then I'd write down a sentence or two to capture the essence of the moment. Not the whole story, just enough to remember it later. I started using a simple Excel spreadsheet with 2 columns, the date and the story. This forced me to keep my entries short and manageable. Over time, this practice sharpened my ability to see the story-worthy moments in my life. It was like putting on a pair of glasses that allowed me to see the beauty and meaning in every day. What I discovered was that the small stories, the ones about a conversation at dinner or a walk with my dog in the rain, were often the most powerful. These are the stories that connect with people because they reflect universal experiences: love, loss, joy, fear, and vulnerability. For example, one night my dog Kaylee woke me up at 2 a.m. to go outside. I was annoyed, but decided to take her out in just my boxers. As we walked, it started pouring rain. At first I was irritated, but then I looked at Kaylee, wagging her tail and smiling up at me, and I realized this might be one of our last walks together. She was 14 years old, and I knew she wouldn't be around much longer. In that moment, the rain, the birds singing in the middle of the night, and my dog's joy all came together to create a memory I'll treasure forever. Homework for Life didn't just help me find stories, it changed my life. It made me more present, more aware of the beauty and meaning in my everyday experiences. It slowed down time. Days that used to blur together now stand out because I've captured their essence in my spreadsheet. It also helped me uncover long-buried memories. That night in the rain with Kaylee brought back a memory of my childhood dog, Measelman. and the realization of how much my father lost when my parents divorced, not just his family and home, but his beloved dog as well. I've shared homework for life with thousands of people, and the results have been incredible. One woman told her it made her feel like an important person for the first time in her life. Another said it saved her life. It's a simple practice, just 5 minutes a day, but it has the power to transform the way you see your life and the world around you. So here's my challenge for you. Start your homework for life. At the end of each day, take a moment to reflect and write down your most story-worthy moment. It doesn't have to be extraordinary, it just has to be real. Over time, you'll find that your life is filled with stories that connect you to others, help you to understand yourself, and remind you of the beauty in the everyday. This is your homework, and trust me, it's worth it. For the record, I'm doing it too. Chapter 4, Dreaming at the End of Your Pen. In this chapter, the author Matthew Dix introduces a powerful exercise called Crash and Burn, a method of stream of consciousness writing designed to unlock creativity, generate story ideas, and even recover forgotten memories. He begins by sharing a personal story about his struggles with PTSD, stemming from a traumatic robbery during his time as a McDonald's manager. This experience, which haunted him for years, led to nightmares and hypervigilance, but also shaped his storytelling journey. Concept of crash and burn is this. He describes it as a way to dream at the end of your pen. It mimics the free association, unpredictable nature of dreams, allowing ideas to flow without judgment or interruption. The exercise is simple, but it requires adherence to 3 key rules. 1. Don't get attached to any idea. Let new thoughts crash into and overtake the current one, even if the new idea seems less compelling. 2. No judgment. Write down every thought, no matter how absurd, nonsensical, or embarrassing. Ignore grammar, punctuation, and structure. And 3, keep the pen moving. Never stop writing. If your mind goes blank, write a list of colors, numbers, or anything familiar to keep the flow going. This is how it works. Dix provides an example of his own crash and burn session, starting with the word grape, and letting his thoughts spiral into memories of childhood, lifeguarding, crimes he committed as a teenager, and even nail polish colors. The exercise led him to rediscover forgotten moments such as stepping on a broken Mellow Yellow bottle as a child, and a vivid memory of his father jumping into a pond and staying underwater so long that young Matthew thought he had drowned. These seemingly random connections often lead to profound realizations of story ideas. For instance, the memory of his father at the pond became a poignant memory of reflection on love and loss. Dix emphasizes that crash and burn is not just about generating ideas, but also about embracing vulnerability and creativity. By silencing the inner critic and allowing thoughts to flow freely, storytellers can uncover hidden gems in their memories and experiences. He likens the process to dreaming while awake, where the intersections of ideas create something entirely new. What's the practical application for this? This chapter encourages the reader to try crash and burn themselves, setting a timer for 10 minutes and following the rules. Dix assures readers that the exercise can be transformative, not only for storytelling, but also for personal growth. He shares how this practice has helped him and his workshop students find unexpected stories and insights. The chapter ends with a reminder that storytelling is not about perfection, but about exploration. By letting go of judgment and embracing the chaos of the mind, anyone can find meaningful stories hidden in everyday moments of life. He also makes this a call to action for us to pick up a pen, let our thoughts wander, and see where the journey takes us. Chapter 5. First, Last, Best, Worst. This introduces a practical method for uncovering personal stories through the use of prompts like first, last, best, worst. These prompts are designed to trigger memories tied to significant moments, such as the first time you experienced something, the last time you did something, the best and worst moments of a particular kind. Dix emphasizes the power of specificity in storytelling, explaining that focusing on precise details makes stories more vivid and relatable. For instance, instead of vaguely stating, "I had a bad day," a storyteller might describe the exact moment that made the day bad, such as spilling coffee on an important document or missing a crucial deadline. He highlights that even seemingly mundane moments can be transformed into compelling stories when viewed through the lens of these prompts. He shares personal anecdotes to illustrate this, such as recounting a worse moment in his life that, while painful or embarrassing at the time, became a rich source of humor and insight upon reflection. These stories, especially those tied to worst moments, often resonate deeply with audiences because they reveal vulnerability and authenticity, fostering a sense of connection. He also demonstrates how these prompts are used in workshops and storytelling events where participants often discover their most engaging stories come from moments they initially overlooked. For example, reflecting on a first job might evoke memories of awkward interviews or early career missteps that are both personal and universally relatable. By sharing his own first, last, best, and worst moments, he shows how these prompts can uncover stories that resonate with a wide audience, turning everyday experiences into powerful narratives. Ultimately, this chapter underscores the importance of vulnerability, specificity, and connection in storytelling, offering a simple yet effective tool for finding and crafting meaningful stories. And the examples that he gives, there are a lot of these in the chapter. The examples that he gives, he forms a table where on the left-hand side, the left-hand column, is different topics. One of them might be kiss. One of them might be job. And then the other columns are first, last, best, and worst. So what's your first kiss? What's your first job? What's your last kiss and your last job and your best and your worst for each of those things? So you have a column of different words, different topics, and then you list first, last, best, and worst, and then use those as cues for what story you might want to build from those. So it's a good exercise, and the chapter has a lot of detail on it. Part 2, Crafting Your Story. Chapter 6, Charity Thief. In this chapter, he's beginning the book with a story, and he'll be using it to model the skills and strategies that follow. It's the fall of 1991. I'm 20 years old, and I'm driving down a lonely stretch of New Hampshire highway. Driving home from the very first booty call of my entire life. I'm excited because I don't know that this is also going to be the very last booty call of my entire life. It's in this moment of excitement that the right front tire of my 1976 Chevy Malibu blows out, but it doesn't just deflate, it disintegrates. It throws rubber and wire across the road in a way I didn't think was possible, and it takes everything I have to get the car over to the shoulder and to a stop. It's 1991. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a spare tire either. I haven't seen a car on this stretch of road for a long time, so I do the only thing I can think of doing. I start hiking back up the road to search for help. 7 hours later, after having given all my money to a half-naked mountain man named Winston in exchange for a balding spare tire, I'm back on the road, heading home 100 miles between me and my apartment in Attleboro, Massachusetts, when I look at the instrument panel and see that I have no gas left. All the money I had, every penny to my name, is in the hands of a half-naked mountain man. I don't have a credit card. I don't have an ATM card. I don't even have a checking account. So I take the next exit and roll my car into a Citgo station. And as I park the car on the edge of the lot, facing a field of fall foliage, I grip the steering wheel in anger. I'm angry, but I'm also sad. I'm 20 years old. I'm a McDonald's manager. I make $7.25 an hour, and I'm the richest person I know. My mother is living on welfare with my pregnant teenage sister. My brother joined the Army a year ago, and I haven't heard from him since. My father disappeared from my life 10 years ago. The only person I know who can help me, who even has a credit card or a car that can make this 100-mile trip to New Hampshire, is my friend Benji, and he's off on some college weekend. I can't get in touch with him because in 1991, when you wanted to call someone, you need to make a phone ring on a wall, and you need to make that phone ring at the moment the person you want to speak to is near the phone. And you need the number for the phone to make it ring. And all of that is impossible for me to get. This was not the plan for my life. Sitting behind the wheel, staring into a field of bright colors, yet I feel anything but bright. I was not supposed to be this alone this early in life. You're not supposed to be 20 years old and have absolutely nobody in your life to call for help. As I sit there in my car, staring into that field of orange and yellow, I see my future ahead of me, an endless series of moments just like this one, where I need help but will have none. So I make a plan. I'm going to beg for gas. Because it's 1991, gas is 85 cents a gallon, so $8 is all I need to get me home. I'll offer my license, my wallet, everything in my car as collateral in exchange for $8 worth of gas and the promise that I'll return to repay that money and more, whatever it takes. So I rehearse my pitch, take a deep breath, and walk in. There's a kid behind the counter, probably about my age. I tell him my problem. I ask him to help. I make my offer. The kid refuses. He doesn't want to risk his job. So I leave. I go back to my car. My plan is simple. I'm going to wait for this kid to go home, wait for the next person to come on duty. And while I wait, I'll refine my pitch. I'll beg again. I'll beg until anyone gives me the money for gas. But as I climb back into the car, I see my crumpled McDonald's uniform on the back seat. And I suddenly have an idea. An hour later, I'm standing on a porch of a small red brick house on a quiet residential street. I'm knocking on a blue door. I'm wearing my McDonald's manager's uniform, blue shirt, blue pants, blue tie, gold name badge. I'm holding a gray McDonald's briefcase with a big M engraved on the front like a shield. I knock on that blue door again. When the door opens, a man is standing in front of me. He looks about 50, but he might as well be 500. He's one of these guys who looks as if he has all the wisdom of the world wrapped up in him, and at that moment, I know that he knows I'm about to do something terrible. And I agree, this is a terrible idea. I know this now. But it's 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I'm standing on his porch in a McDonald's uniform. It's one of those moments when you realize this is the only way to get out of a terrible situation. It's to go through with it. So I take another deep breath and say, "Hi, I'm Matt. I'm collecting money for Ronald McDonald's children's charities." The man doesn't move. He doesn't say a word. He's like Stonehenge, frozen in time and forever waiting for this moment, waiting for me to arrive. The next words that come out of my mouth surprise me as much as they surprise him, because they are completely unplanned. My mom died of cancer when I was just a little boy, and now my sister is dying of cancer, and I'm just trying to do whatever I can to help. The man finally moves. He points his finger at me and says, "You stay right there." He walks back into his house, and I know what he's doing. He's calling the police. They will come and arrest me for stealing money from McDonald's, which will actually happen 2 years later, but not on this day. On this day, he returns to the door with a $20 bill in his hand, which is like $20,000 to me on this day. As I raise my hand to say, "No, it's too much," he says, "My wife Lisa died of cancer 5 years ago. Now it's my turn to freeze." Keeps talking. He tells me about her cancer, her death. He tells me that his 2 kids came back from California for the funeral, but he hasn't seen them since that day. He says that the last 2 years of Lisa's life were hard, but it was the very last year that he regrets the most. He tells me how hard his wife fought to stay alive, and how he wishes now that he could have told her that it was okay to go, but he loved her too much to say those words. Before I realize what's happening, I'm sitting on the porch with him as he spills his guts to me. And in that moment, I know that I am, without a doubt, the single worst person on the face of the earth. The man talks to me for 20 minutes about his wife and his children, and when he's done, he hugs me as if he hasn't hugged a person in 5 years. Then he presses the $20 bill into my hand. It feels like poison now. I say goodbye. I walk down the stone path, up the street, and back to the gas station. I use his money to put gas in my car and hit the road once again, heading in the direction of home. And as I pull onto the highway, I remember the last time I was sitting behind this wheel just an hour or so ago, feeling lonely, worried that I would be alone for the rest of my life. Now I know how stupid I was, because tonight I'll sit with my friends in the living room and eat pizza, drink beer, and watch The Simpsons. But that man, he'll be alone tonight behind that blue door. He'll be alone tonight and tomorrow night, and probably for many, many more nights. I leave New Hampshire knowing that I know nothing about loneliness, but also knowing that I never want to know about loneliness the way that man understood it that day, and will probably understand it for many, many days. I was lying to this man, taking his money, while he's pouring out his soul to me. It's in this moment that I realize how self-absorbed and foolish I've been. I thought I knew loneliness, but I didn't, not like this man did. This is the 5-second moment that defines the story. It's the moment when everything changes for me, when I understand something new about myself and the world. And that's what makes a story worth telling. Everything else, the flat tire, the mountain man, the gas station kid, leads up to the moment. It's the heart of the story. It's the reason I tell it. So here's the thing about storytelling. Not everything makes it into the final version. For example, there was a hitchhiker named Randy who was with me for part of the journey. He was hilarious and bizarre, but he didn't serve the story, so I left him out. Same goes for Winston, the mountain man. He's a great character, but he distracts from the main point. As storytellers, we have to make tough choices about what to include and what to leave out. Then there's the ending. In real life, I felt terrible about what I'd done. I made a deal with myself to pay back the $28 I'd taken by putting $1 into the McDonald's charity box every time I got change. Over the years, I ended up donating over $600. But when I first told this story at a Moth Story Slam, I included that ending and it ruined the story. It took away the tension, the guilt, and the unresolved feeling that made the story stick with you. So I cut it. The lesson here is that storytelling isn't about telling the whole truth. It's about crafting a narrative that serves the audience and highlights the moments that matter. And in this story, the moment that matters is me standing on that man's porch, realizing how little I knew about loneliness and how much I had to learn. That's the story, that's the point, and that's why I tell it. Chapter 7. Every story takes only 5 seconds to tell. Let me start with a bold statement. Every great story you've ever heard, read, or watched boils down to a single 5-second moment. That's it, just 5 seconds. It might sound ridiculous, but it's true. These are the moments when something fundamentally changes forever, when you fall in love, lose someone, make a life-altering decision, or discover something new about yourself. These tiny transformative moments are the heart of every story worth telling. Think about it. In Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs are cool, but the story isn't really about them. It's about the moment when the characters realize they've lost control of the park. That's the 5-second moment. Everything else, the T-Rex, the dinosaurs, the chaos, is just there to serve that realization. The same is true for your stories. The purpose of storytelling is to bring your audience to that one moment of transformation and make them feel it as deeply as you did. Now, finding your 5-second moment isn't always easy. Sometimes it's buried under layers of big events and flashy details. For example, people often come to me and say, I went to Tanzania last summer. I want to tell that story. My response, no, you don't. Traveling to Tanzania isn't a story. It's an event. But if something happened there that changed you, if you had a moment of realization, transformation, or connection, then you might have a story. The key is to dig past the big obvious stuff and find the small, powerful moment that matters. Let me give you an example from my own life. I tell a story about my wife uncovering a secret from my childhood, my struggle with hunger. This story is about 7 minutes long, but it all boils down to a single moment at the dinner table when my wife says, I know you were hungry as a boy. That's the 5-second moment. Everything else in the story, the humor, the backstory, the details about my childhood, is there to bring that moment into focus. It's the moment when I realize my wife knows my heart better than I do, and it's one of the most important moments of my life. But people often miss their 5-second moments because they're too focused on the big stuff. They think the story's about the trip to Tanzania, the near-death experience, or the courtroom drama. It's not. It's about the tiny moment when something shifted inside you. For me, it took years to figure this out. I once told a story about being arrested for a crime I didn't commit. But it wasn't until 5 years later that I realized the real story wasn't about the arrest or the trial. It was about a moment in a dark closet when I asked a God I didn't believe in for help and got an answer. That was the 5-second moment, and it changed everything. So how do you find your 5-second moment? Start by telling the story out loud. Don't worry about structure or stakes or anything else. Just spill it all out. As you do, pay attention to the moments that make your heart move. Those are the moments that matter. Once you've found your 5-second moment, you're ready to start crafting your story. Everything else, the details, the humor, the stakes, should serve that moment and bring it into the greatest possible clarity. Remember, storytelling isn't about the big flashy events. It's about the small, powerful moments that change us forever. Find those moments and you'll find your story. Chapter 8. Find your beginning. I'm also about to forever ruin most movies and many books for you. Let's talk about beginnings. Finding the right place to start your story is one of the most important decisions you'll make as a storyteller. A good beginning sets the stage, creates momentum, and points both you and your audience in the right direction. It's like an arrow that leads everyone straight to your 5-second moment, the heart of your story. But finding that perfect beginning isn't always easy. Take my story, Charity Thief, in the last chapter. The 5-second moment of that story is when I realize I know nothing about loneliness. So to find the beginning, I asked myself, what's the opposite of knowing nothing about loneliness? The answer was believing I understood loneliness. That belief was rooted in a moment earlier the same day when I was sitting in my car, feeling sorry for myself and thinking I was the loneliest person in the world. That's where the story begins, because it sets up the transformation that happens later. Not every story is that straightforward. Sometimes the beginning isn't anywhere near the 5-second moment. For instance, in the story about my wife discovering my childhood hunger, the 5-second moment happens at the dinner table when she reveals she knows my secret. To find the beginning, I had to go back to my childhood, to the moment I decided to keep my hunger a secret. That's the opposite of the ending, and that's where my story needed to start. Here's a tip. Start as close to the end as possible. Kurt Vonnegut followed this rule when writing short stories, and it's a great way to keep your story tight and focused. In Charity Thief, I could have started with the amusing details of my weekend getaway. The girl I was visiting, her quirky Batcave apartment, and the hilarity of the situation. But none of that served the story, so I cut it and started with the disintegration of my car tire, the moment that set everything in motion. Another key to a strong beginning is forward momentum. Start with action. In Charity Thief, I'm driving down a lonely stretch of highway. In another story, This Is Going to Suck, I'm walking out of a record store 2 days before Christmas. These openings immediately pull the audience into the story and make them want to know what happens next. Filmmakers use this technique all the time. Think about the opening scenes of Star Wars, A New Hope, a space chase, or The Dark Knight, a bank robbery. Movement grabs attention and immerses the audience in the story. But here's what you don't want to do. Start with a thesis statement or a summary. Saying, "This story is hilarious," or "You're not going to believe this," sets expectations and ruins the element of surprise. Instead, let the story speak for itself. Start with the action, the setting, or the conflict, and let the audience discover the humor, drama, or emotion as the story unfolds. Sometimes finding the right beginning takes trial and error. You might start in one place and realize it's not working, so you move closer to the end. That's okay. Storytelling is a process, and the more you refine your beginning, the stronger your story will be. So dig deep, find the opposite of your 5-second moment, and start there. And remember, keep it simple, keep it moving, and let the story do the work. Chapter 9, Stakes, 5 Ways to Keep Your Story Compelling, and Why There Are Dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. Let's talk about stakes. They are the lifeblood of storytelling. They're the reason your audience leans in, the reason they care about what happens next. Without stakes, your story is just a series of events. With stakes, it's a roller coaster ride that keeps your audience on the edge of their seats. Stakes are why we watch movies, read books, and listen to stories instead of, say, playing video games or eating pizza. They're what make us wonder what happens next. Now, stakes can take many forms. They can be as dramatic as Nazis and snakes in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or as subtle as the fear of rejection when asking someone on a date. But the key is this: stakes make your audience care. They make them want to hear the next sentence, and the one after that, and the one after that. So here are 5 strategies for raising stakes. These are tools you can use to keep your audience hooked, even if your story isn't naturally packed with drama. Let's dive in. 1. The elephant. Every story needs an elephant. This is the big obvious thing everyone can see, the want, the need, the peril, or the mystery that drives your story. It's the question your audience wants answered. For example, in Charity Thief, the elephant is clear. I'm broke, stranded, and desperate for gas money. The audience knows I'm in trouble and they want to see how I'll get out of it. The elephant sets the stakes right from the start. 2. The backpack. A backpack is a piece of information you give your audience early on that they carry with them throughout the story. It's a detail that adds weight to the stakes. In Charity Thief, I tell the audience about my financial struggles and my family's hardships. This context makes my desperation more relatable and the stakes more personal. The audience isn't just watching me struggle, they understand why I'm struggling. The backpack is the entire setup that he does while he's sitting in the car, but it's the setup, as in Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 13, where they say, well, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to ask him for the money, and then I'm going to offer him this, this, and this, and he's going to say yes. Then he goes into the store and asks for the free gas, tells him he'll give him collateral, he'll give him all kinds of things that he has in his car, and the guy says no. So the backpack is the way that the audience gets committed to what it is you're trying to do, and then when you fail, they say, oh, that's too bad. And then you come up with another plan. 3 is breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are the little hints you drop along the way to keep your audience engaged. They're the clues that make your audience think, oh, I see where this is going, only to surprise them later. In Charity Thief, I mention the man who eventually confronts me. I describe him in a way that makes the audience wonder, what's this guy going to do? Breadcrumbs build tension and keep the stakes high. The hourglass is all about slowing things down at the right moment. This is the fourth of the 5 strategies, the hourglass. It's about slowing things down at the right moment. It's the pause before the big reveal, the moment when you let the tension build. In Charity Thief, I use an hourglass when I'm standing on the man's porch about to knock on his door. I describe the scene in ridiculous detail, making the audience wait for the next sentence. The longer the pause, the higher the stakes. And number 5 is crystal ball. The crystal ball is a false prediction, a moment when you tell the audience what you think will happen, only to surprise them later. In Charity Thief, I say, "He's calling the police and they're going to arrest me." Of course, that doesn't happen, but the audience doesn't know that. The crystal ball creates suspense and keeps them guessing. So, how do these strategies play out in real life? At a Moth Story Slam, the stakes are built into the event. You're standing in front of hundreds of strangers, sharing a personal story and being judged on your performance. The stakes are high, and the audience feels it. But not every story has built-in stakes. This is where these strategies come in. For example, in Charity Thief, the ending is compelling. I'm impersonating a charity worker to steal money, and the confrontation with the man at the door is intense. But the journey to that moment isn't naturally exciting. My tire blows out, I buy a new tire. I run out of gas, not exactly riveting stuff. But using these 5 strategies, I turn a mundane series of events into a story that keeps the audience hooked. Stakes are the reason we care about stories. They're the reason we root for Indiana Jones, cry over Jack and Rose in Titanic, and cheer when the dinosaurs escape in Jurassic Park. Without stake, there's no reason to keep listening. So the next time you tell a story, ask yourself, what are the stakes? What does my audience want to know? And how can I make them care? Because at the end of the day, stakes are non-negotiable. They're what makes your story worth telling. Chapter 10, The 5 Permissible Lies of True Storytelling. All right, let's get something out of the way. I lied to you. Yep, you heard me. My story, Charity Thief, it's full of lies. But before you start clutching your pearls, let me explain. These aren't the kind of lies that make me look better or cover up my mistakes. No, these are the kind of lies that make the story better for you, the audience. And that's the key. As storytellers, we don't lie for personal gain. We lie to serve the story. Now, I know the word lie might sound harsh, but it's attention-grabbing, isn't it? And as a storyteller, words matter. So let's call them permissible lies. And I'll walk you through the 5 types that are not only acceptable, but often necessary to craft a compelling story. Important caveats before we begin. There are 3 rules you need to know. 1, we lie only for the audience's benefit. These lies are not about making ourselves look heroic or noble. They're about making the story more engaging, emotional, or clear for the listener. 2, memory is slippery. Every time you tell a story, your memory shifts a little. It's not intentional, but it happens. So even when you think you're telling the truth, you're probably not. And 3, we never add something that wasn't there. We can manipulate the truth, but we don't invent it. We're not writing fiction. We're crafting stories from real events. With that out of the way, let's talk about the 5 permissible lies. 1, omission. Every story involves leaving things out. If you included every single detail, your story would never end. The trick is to omit strategically. For example, in Charity Thief, I left out a hitchhiker named Randy. He was with me for much of the story, but he didn't add to the emotional core of the narrative. In fact, he would have distracted from the moment I was trying to create. So Randy got the boot. The audience didn't need to know him, and the story was better without him. Compression. Sometimes you need to condense time. Life doesn't always unfold in a neat, narrative-friendly way. So we compress events to keep the story moving. In Charity Thief, I didn't tell you about every single gas station I stopped at, or every failed attempt to get help. I compress those moments into a single impactful scene. The audience doesn't need the whole journey. They just need the highlights. Assumption. This is where you fill in the gaps with reasonable guesses. For instance, I might describe a car as a cherry red Corvette, even if I don't remember the exact make and model. The point is to paint a vivid picture, not to get bogged down in details. But here's the rule. Always make the most reasonable assumption. Don't turn a station wagon into a Ferrari just because it sounds cooler. Progression. Sometimes the order of events in real life doesn't make for a great story, so we rearrange them. I once worked with a storyteller who spread her brother's ashes in several places, including a baseball field, a strip club, and a family picnic spot. In real life, the baseball field came first, but in the story, it made more sense to end with that emotional moment. Changing the order didn't alter the truth, it just made it more satisfying. And conflation, number 5. This is where you combine multiple events into one. Life is messy, and stories need focus. By conflating similar moments, you can create a single, powerful scene that captures the essence of what happened. For example, if I had multiple conversations with someone over time, I might combine them into one dialogue for the sake of clarity and impact. Why these lies matter. Stories aren't about facts, they're about truth, and sometimes to get to the emotional truth of a story, you have to bend the factual truth. These lies aren't about deception, they're about connection. They help your audience feel what you felt, see what you saw, and understand why this moment mattered. So the next time you tell a story, don't be afraid to omit, compress, assume, rearrange, or conflate. Just remember to do it for the audience, not for yourself. Because at the end of the day, storytelling isn't about you, it's about them. Chapter 11, Cinema of the Mind. Let's talk about movies. I've mentioned them a lot in this book, and for good reason. A great storyteller creates a movie in the minds of their audience. Whether you're speaking to a packed theater, a boardroom, or just a group of friends at dinner, your goal is to make your listeners see the story unfold in their heads. This is what I call the cinema of the mind. The golden rule of storytelling: location, location, location. Here's the secret to create a movie in someone's mind. You must always provide a physical location for every moment of your story. That's it. If your audience knows where you are at all times, the movie keeps playing. If they lose track of the setting, the movie stops and you've lost them. Here's an example of 2 ways to start a story about my grandmother. Version 1. My grandmother's name is Odellie Dix, which probably explains why she is who she is. She's a crooked old lady in both body and mind. She wears only dark colors and likes to serve food that has stewed in pots for days. Version 2. I'm standing at the edge of my grandmother's garden, watching her relentlessly pull weeds from the unforgiving soil. My grandmother's name is Odellie Dix, which probably explains why she is who she is. She's a crooked old lady in both body and mind. She wears only dark colors and likes to serve food that has stewed in pots for days. Do you see the difference? The first version feels like an essay. The second version is a story. Why? Because it starts with a location. You can picture the garden, the weeds, and my grandmother hunched over. The movie is rolling. When you provide a location, you're not just setting the scene, you're giving your audience a way to connect with the story. They're no longer just listening to words, they're seeing the action, and when people can see your story, they're more likely to feel it. In my story, The Charity Thief, I needed to explain a lot of backstory, my financial struggles, my family situation, and my feelings of isolation. Instead of dumping all that information on the audience, I set the scene. I described myself sitting in my car at a gas station, staring out at the empty road. By grounding the story in a specific location, I made the backstory part of the movie. To avoid pitfalls, here's what you don't want to do. Don't start your story with a thesis statement or a vague generalization. For example, love is a beautiful thing when it isn't killing you. There are 2 kinds of toddlers in this world, those who raise your hopes for humanity and those who belong in a cage. These aren't stories, they're essays. They don't create a movie in the mind. They don't transport your audience to a specific time and place. Instead, they leave your listeners stuck in the present, staring at you, waiting for the story to begin. The power of specificity. Specificity is your best friend. The more details you provide, the more vivid the movie becomes. But remember, every detail should serve the story. In the example of my grandmother, I didn't just describe her garden for the sake of it. I used it to foreshadow her personality and the way she would later pull my loose teeth with the same ruthless efficiency she used on the weeds. Creating a cinema of the mind is one of the simplest and most effective storytelling techniques. All you have to do is give every moment in your story a location. Turn every moment into a scene and every scene into a setting. When you do this, your stories will come alive. They'll be captivating, memorable, and visceral. Your audience won't just hear your story. They'll see it, feel it, and remember it long after the credits roll. If you can't tell, I'm really enjoying this book. And next week, we'll start with Chapter 12, The Principle of But and Therefore. This has been Storyworthy Part 1 by Matthew Dix. It's a really good book, and I very much enjoyed reading it, and I look forward to finishing the second half with you next week. So that's where we'll leave it. Thanks for joining us. That's a wrap.